Greetings, I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, and when I'm not waiting for Donald Duck to go into the public domain so I can make a movie where it's revealed he was the real Golden State Killer, I'm here at the Wolfula reviewing movies. Surprising nobody except the most naive who still hold a sliver of hope for the future of humanity, a sequel was very quickly made to that shitty Winnie the Pooh horror flick that came out a year ago, which honestly feels like a decade ago with how much of a nightmare in hell that the world has become since then. Released in March of 2024, Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 2. Directed by Reese Frake Waterfield of Jagged Edge Productions. The second entry in what Waterfield has dubbed, the Twisted Childhood Universe. So based on that name, you might assume the villains of this franchise will be Jeffrey Epstein or Jimmy Savile, but no, the Twisted Childhood Universe will center around public domain children's book characters that previously received Disney film adaptations, like Winnie the Pooh, Pinocchio, Peter Pan, and even fucking Bambi. And these films will turn these beloved characters into an edgy 15-year-old's idea of horror movie monsters. And these films will even comprise a shared cinematic universe that will culminate in an Avengers-style crossover film titled, and I'm not joking, Pooniverse Monsters Assemble. So wait, is it the Twisted Childhood Universe or the Pooniverse? I guess I wouldn't want to live in a universe that sounds like Pooniverse, and it's a little too on the nose regarding the quality of said universe. Also, all of these movies are planned to release within the space of 1 year before a third standalone Pooh horror movie comes out in 2026. So they're definitely not rushing these movies out of desperation before the money runs dry from what can best be described as an ironic novelty. It's clear that Jagged Edge Productions has an ambitious slate of diarrhea planned for us in the future, but before they can drench us in more of their excrement, we have to address their most recent pile of shit, Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 2. I considered seeing this film during its very brief 3-day release in theaters, but I decided to wait until it came out on home video and I had more material to work with than a very misleading trailer and very Photoshop posters. And also, I didn't want to be seen in public watching a Winnie the Pooh horror movie in theaters. That's the kind of thing that gets you put on a list, and I'm on enough of those. The original Blood and Honey was made surprisingly for $100,000. Big cocaine budget, I suppose. And unsurprisingly, the film was shot in about 2 weeks, and even more unsurprisingly, the movie fucking sucked. It was just a quick, cheap cash grab to make money off the novelty of a Winnie the Pooh horror movie as soon as the property went public domain. There was no creativity to the film's approach to the original material. It didn't feel like an organic translation of Winnie the Pooh into a horror villain. It was just take a benign cartoon bear and turn him into a generic slasher killer with only a vague resemblance to the source material. The laziest, most surface-level approach to reimagining a children's book into a horror story. When I think of a good translation of a classic kid story to horror, I think of something like the video game American McGee's Alice, where it is a dark and violent take on the original Lewis Carroll story, but it's true to and creative with the source material.
Save us, Alice!
It's easy to make a horror version of anything. There's a reason why we're seeing so many horror movies based on things entering the public domain now. Just cover a beloved character in blood and say they're killing people now. Any hack can do that. 100 years from now, there's gonna be a horror movie based on Bluey. These Pooh horror movies are the exact equivalent of that. The first Blood and Honey sucked, but the novelty of seeing Pooh kill people made it a hit, at least for its budget, making $7 million at the box office. Enough to be worthy for a sequel, since this was the closest the distributor of the film has reached to mainstream success. And the budget of Blood and Honey 2 was raised to $500,000, and you can buy a lot of cocaine with that.
It's got my name written all over it.
I went into Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 2 really disliking the first movie, but feeling that it couldn't be any worse, and with all the criticism, there'd have to be some improvement over the first movie at least. And after watching the sequel, I guess there technically are some improvements, but it still has most of the same problems as the first movie. The sequel's just a bigger movie, and I use the word bigger loosely, given the sequel's still very modest budget. And being a bigger movie means that it also comes with some new, bigger problems, and I'll explain what these problems are in my review of Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 2. But first, I have a message from my sponsor, me! Pledge to my Patreon today to support the channel, help it continue to grow, and you'll also get access to weekly movie nights every Sunday, and archive commentaries if you miss the movie nights live. Just $5 a month to get a movie night every week. Here's the movie I'll be streaming next Sunday. Pledge to patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula if you're interested in my bonus movie streams, and I thank you in advance.
All things truly wicked start from innocence.
Like the previous Blood and Honey, the sequel tells its backstory through the scribbles found in a junior high school spiral notebook.
Since last we saw our Christopher Robin, things haven't been so good.
Essentially, Blood and Honey 2 hits all the sequel cliches. After Christopher Robin endured torture at the stubby hands of his best friend Pooh Bear, and Chris witnessed Pooh and Piglet kill Robin's fiancée and a collection of interchangeable sluts, bitches, and whatever the British equivalent to a redneck is, Christopher Robin was left traumatized by the ordeal and became a pariah, blamed for the crimes of his former animal pals because Chris blaming the murders on an anthropomorphic bear wearing a shirt wouldn't really fly in most courts.
He became a pariah.
Despite everybody thinking Christopher Robin is crazy and that he killed a bunch of people, for whatever reason he was not incarcerated and followed his dreams of becoming a crudely drawn doctor, just like me.
Christopher finished his medical training.
Meanwhile, another unseen, harsh winter forces Pooh and Piglet to regroup with their estranged friends Owl and Tigger, the latter of whom finally entered the public domain, making it legal for him to participate in slut murder. Speaking of slut murder, the film really begins with the Canker sisters, after hitting middle age, taking part in one of the oldest horror cliches in the book, a Ouija board seance, but usually this cliche is carried out by teens at a slumber party. But two of these adult women look like if Gwendolyn Christie and Danielle Harris today got hooked on meth.
I can't believe we're really doing this right now. Focus for once, Jamie.
Speaking of which, Pooh arrives looking for payment for said meth, and he isn't afraid to break a few fingers to get it. Alright, let's go through that last kill frame by frame. The pipe just materializes in her chest as a PNG file within 2 frames. They released this movie in theaters! Speaking of which, I can't help but think having this blonde bitch scurry off to the safety of a pink dune buggy is them trying to sadly riff on the Barbie movie, which had come out around the time they shot this movie. They must have been thinking to themselves, we're killing Barbie in our movie, when they're just killing Winnie the Pooh. A lot of the kills in these movies are just rehashes of things you saw in the Hatchet series and other direct-to-video films from 15 years ago, but a little worse and with a bad cosplay of a children's book character carrying them out. This is the cliche cold opening where you have a bunch of killings happen at the beginning that have nothing to do with what happens in the rest of the movie. It's just the movie trying to keep your attention after showing you some shitty flash animation, like a department store photographer jingling some keys in front of a toddler already looking at their iPad.
Who's the abomination now?
This scene is also an excuse to introduce the film's version of Owl, who looks like one of the bird monsters from the Power Rangers movie, as Owl smushes the Crypt Keeper's head. I didn't even need to talk about that scene. It wasn't important at all as we meet up with Christopher Robin again, who suddenly looks like Drake Bell after getting stung by bees.
He just goes blank.
None of the cast members from the previous Blood and Honey return, not even the actors that played Pooh and Piglet. They probably weren't willing to get paid jack shit again after the first movie made a decent amount of money. Christopher Robin in Blood and Honey 2 is for real played by the producer of the original film. You can't get cheaper than that. This is some Ed Wood shit.
When I was younger, playing with Pooh in the woodland and...
They try to explain away Christopher Robin looking different in the sequel by saying that the first Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey we saw was actually a movie based on Christopher Robin's life. This sequel is trying to be smarter than it is by being meta, but it's just unabashedly rehashing 30-year-old ideas from the Scream series. When they show a 3C Films review of the first movie within the sequel, it just comes off as a pathetic attempt to downplay their own failure and show they're able to make fun of their life's greatest accomplishment, saying, that first movie might have been embarrassingly bad, but that was just a movie. The sequel is the real deal. No, you made that first fucking terrible Winnie the Pooh horror movie. It wasn't bad for the sake of performance art. Own up to its badness. Don't try to distance yourself from it through irony.
It's porn time.
The director of this movie, unsurprisingly, since he probably never read any of the Winnie the Pooh books or did research of any kind because it would mean reading at a preschool level, misses what should have been the obvious meta-narrative of this film. Christopher Robin was a real person. He was the son of A.A. Milne, the author of the original Winnie the Pooh books. All of Christopher Robin's friends in the 100-Acre Wood were real stuffed animals that Christopher Robin played with. The real Christopher Robin grew up to resent his father capitalizing on and commercializing Christopher's childhood. And Christopher Robin also resented having his real name Christopher Robin associated with the Winnie the Pooh brand. So the real Christopher Robin gave Pooh and all of his other stuffed animals away and distanced himself from his father's legacy. You could easily make a horror movie out of Christopher Robin's real life. His father's vengeful spirit brings Pooh and his other stuffed friends to life to seek revenge against Christopher Robin for forsaking them. It'd be a lot more clever than what these films actually do with the backstory and the family of Christopher Robin that we meet.
I love you.
Christopher Robin lives in Ashdown, and despite being a pretty nice-looking community, their welcome sign is crudely drawn in marker and hung from a branch. I guess they still had the same sign budget as the first movie.
Hey.
Christopher Robin should probably move, considering that whenever he's not looking, people write murderer on his car. Honestly, that looks pretty badass.
I didn't want you to see this, Chris.
What isn't so badass is how this has affected Christopher's family life. A family we only really briefly get to know for the sake of adding more bodies to the count.
She'd load this properly.
And adding some level of dramatic tension with Chris's little sister in danger.
We are gonna need protective.
In the meantime, Chris is now in therapy, which always works for characters in horror movies, especially that forgotten dead bitch from the first movie, who was being sexually assaulted by a man in her sleep and was told by her therapist to go on vacation, only to be rewarded by being killed by Winnie the fucking Pooh. It goes without saying that the director of these movies has some complicated feelings towards women. In a way, these Winnie the Pooh movies are his own special kind of therapy to get those feelings out. The actual therapy session is really just the director's way of trying to build his shitty shared universe out by tacking on a character from one of its future films.
Do you recall anything from the session?
The therapist is Mary Darling, the mother from Peter Pan, who will later appear in Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare, where Mary will likely try to convince her daughter Wendy that Neverland wasn't real, until Peter Pan returns for Wendy's blood.
He wants to come to Neverland with me.
So they're saving the therapist's brutal murder for that movie. Otherwise, you just know this therapist would end up getting skull-fucked to death by Piglet. She'll have to settle for Captain Hook doing that instead.
I'm gonna take you to Neverland.
Speaking of Piglet, the 100-Acre Wood crew are planning their next move, and it looks like a congregation of Rita Repulsa's henchmen. We got Goldar, we got Finster, we even got Squat. Well, which is exactly what we get for deciding to watch this movie.
Never trust them ever again.
The filmmakers drastically redesigned Pooh's look for this film. Again, they can explain it away as the Pooh we saw last time was just the shitty movie version of Pooh. This is the shitty real-life version of Pooh. The Pooh costume in the original film somehow cost over $700, but for the sequel, they made a new costume that cost them $20,000, and man, they need to ask for their fucking money back. It still looks like shit, just in a different way. The Pooh in the previous movie vaguely looked like a piss-colored Shrek, and his mask could barely move, its face locked into a neutral expression, but it still kinda looked like Winnie the Pooh. In the sequel, Pooh kinda just looks like a piss-colored Grinch. Sequel Pooh is also played by an actor who's jacked, so they have him wear a pillow underneath his overalls to make him husky. It comes off looking like a shitty mall Santa addicted to meth. It feels like the director didn't like people making fun of the way his version of Pooh looks, instead of thinking it looks scary, so he decided to try to make his version of Pooh angrier, grittier, badass, something to take serious. But this is a fucking Winnie the Pooh horror movie. It's the dumbest idea for a horror movie imaginable, but they take it so deadly seriously. Ultimately, this movie is about Christopher Robin coming to terms with his traumatic past, or in other words, his twisted childhood. And in therapy, we see flashbacks to Christopher Robin's twisted childhood and see Winnie the Pooh is a little kid, and apparently Pooh was always evil and violent the whole time. Christopher Robin was just a really dumb child who somehow became a doctor. But how does nobody notice the kid version of that yellow bastard hanging out with their son for his entire childhood?
His naive young mind simply wiped away what he couldn't understand or explain.
Digging up more traumatic memories, it's revealed that Christopher Robin had a brother who was kidnapped mysteriously from one of those birthday parties with no adult supervision for the sake of letting kidnappings happen. So the film becomes Christopher trying to find out what happened to the lost brother he, totally forgot about anyway until a few hours ago.
If you can remember that person, it can reopen the whole investigation.
Christopher Robin tries to look up information about the abduction by Googling it. Oh, I'm sorry, Milning it. Yeah, their homage to the original author of the Pooh books is by naming a fake search engine after him. I'm sure he's rolling over in his grave with a big smile on his face. Eventually, Christopher tracks down the man who kidnapped Chris's brother, and this guy literally goes on a 10-minute monologue comprehensively describing in detail the process of kidnapping Christopher Robin's brother.
He offered to pay my gambling debts.
How this guy gave Chris's brother and a bunch of other abducted kids to a mad scientist named Dr. Gallup.
He was experimenting.
And somehow this guy was aware that the kids were to become test subjects in an animal-human gene splicing experiment.
Turned them weak kids into monsters.
And this guy claimed to try to rescue the kids, but they were already killed by the mad scientist. But this guy killed the mad scientist, and the corpses of the dead animal kids came back to life, and then this guy fucking blows his head off. It's just an insane scene to digest. It's just a massive lore dump in the middle of the movie, and you're basically told everything by this jackass.
Them kids, they didn't stay buried.
There's no mystery long before the movie ends where things could be gradually revealed. They just get the fucking lore out of the way as quickly as possible like it's a goddamn chore. And yeah, Winnie the Pooh in these movies is a half-human, half-animal genetic experiment. And he's also obviously Christopher Robin's missing brother Billy. So this is just so far removed from Winnie the Pooh at this point that it's pretty much just its own thing, using the name Winnie the Pooh because it's recognizable. What does this have to do with Winnie the Pooh? Well, there's a character named Pooh in it, there's a character named Piglet in it, and I don't fucking know.
May God pardon my soul.
Speaking of Piglet again, Piglet fucking dies in this movie. He gets his head blown off early on, which doesn't really mean anything since the human-animal hybrids can regenerate. It just seems like they couldn't write for more than 3 killers in this movie. And wanted to give extra spotlight to the new critters, Owl and Tigger, the latter of which barely appears in the movie until the end. He attacks some cops investigating the mysterious deaths in the area, but this version of Tigger doesn't really bounce, which was Tigger's whole fucking thing. He built his whole identity around bouncing, and this version does not fucking do that. Tigger in this movie leaps, I guess, but that's not fucking bouncing, bro.
Time to clip them wings.
Well, if you're only interested in this movie for the kills, it's safe to say you'll probably love Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 2. There's a lot more characters and a lot more death and gore consequently, but it's all delivered in a very disjointed way. A lot of the deaths just feel tacked on to make the movie longer and inflate the number of deaths for the sake of YouTube countdowns. Like Owl swoops down and attacks a random father going birdwatching with his son, and Pooh throws the guy's limbs into a river. You can put this scene anywhere in the movie. It doesn't have anything to do with anything. There will be characters with 1 minute of screen time with Christopher Robin who come back and get killed 45 minutes later, and there'll only be a vague idea of who these characters were because so much time has passed. Like, oh yeah, this dude taking a shower was Christopher Robin's friend we briefly see a couple times. And this for some reason warrants Owl vomiting acid on the guy's face. There are a lot of deaths in this movie, but there isn't a coherent narrative to tie it all together and maintain attention in between the deaths. I didn't even mention this whole time, but Christopher Robin has a love interest in this film, Lexi, Chris's childhood friend. I didn't mention this until now because it's so unimportant and they barely interact, but she essentially just acts as the flimsy bridge between the main narrative of Christopher Robin and the film's other two major subplots.
Babysitting that little shit Freddy the next couple of nights.
Lexi is playing Laurie Strode as she babysits a rambunctious youth who is supposed to be a mocking portrayal of horror fans. Little Easter egg that you might have missed. He's wearing a hockey mask and a red and green striped sweater, a subtle homage to Leatherface.
Tonight, the maniac's decided he's the killer in a slasher film.
The other subplot occupies a larger part of the narrative in the final act, but has an even more tenuous place in the loosely connected series of events that are this film's story. Lexi has Christopher Robin check out the venue for an upcoming rave that one of her friends is organizing, but Chris is instantly rejected from being able to attend the rave.
Don't worry about me, I'll go home then.
Big fucking tragedy there. But despite the fact that neither Christopher Robin or any of the other characters we actually spend time with attend this rave, it still becomes the target of Pooh, Tigger, and Owl because the movie wanted more deaths in the trio's pursuit of vengeance against the town, which is fine and good, but maybe we could have spent more than 1 minute with some of these ravers before we watched them getting chased and picked off in a warehouse for 20 minutes.
Better watch where you're going, bitch.
Like, I don't know why they didn't just make the whole movie about Winnie the Pooh killing ravers. It's so clear that that's what they wanted to do because they spend so much time and effort killing these nameless characters off. But it just ends up feeling irrelevant when the movie is about Christopher Robin, a character based on a real guy who just happened to own some stuffed animals at one point. All of these deaths are just more of the movie jingling some keys in front of your face. Ultimately, the film's plot really boils down to Pooh targeting those closest to his arch-enemy/brother, Christopher Robin. Starting with Pooh going after Lexi, who's still babysitting, but the scene where Pooh attacks just boils down to Lexi and her charge very quickly escaping from the house with the police already outside. Pooh does make sure to kill a random cop before he leaves, though. Black characters never survive Winnie the Pooh movies. Pooh does succeed in brutally killing Christopher's, and I guess technically Pooh's own parents, because somebody in the Robin house thinks loading knives into the dishwasher blades up makes sense. This whole family deserves to be taken out of the gene pool. Pooh ends up abducting his estranged little sister Bunny, and I wonder if that name is foreshadowing her form in a future film. Ooh.
Where is my sister?
The two Robin brothers confront each other in the end. One a bear, the other a twink. The ultimate showdown. The movie remembers at the last minute that it advertised on the posters a flaming chainsaw, which looks fucking badass. But the chainsaw Pooh accidentally catches on fire in the actual movie just looks awkward, and even more awkward to use, and it's only on fire for like a minute. The fire gets put out in the next scene. Pooh doesn't even use the flaming chainsaw on anybody. This was one of the things the director hyped up early on about the sequel, but unsurprisingly, it was just a marketing gimmick. No way! Ultimately, Pooh is led to the shallow grave where he was reborn as an edgy fursona, which makes Pooh nostalgic for when he didn't dress like a lumberjack.
Sorry about what happened to you.
But then he remembers he needs to fucking kill Christopher Robin. Luckily, Lexi arrives to save the day by getting herself killed in the process. But not if Chris has anything to say about it. Winnie the Pooh talking? I just can't take this movie seriously anymore. Fortunately, Pooh arbitrarily didn't kill Christopher Robin's sister. She just was entirely absent during the film's climax, creating the illusion of tension. And the movie ends with a really shitty-sounding upbeat SoundCloud song, like this is supposed to be a happy ending.
Too much time spent, too many lives spent on.
Christopher Robin's parents were just killed tonight, and even worse, this small rural town's rave community has been completely eradicated. This is nothing to play happy music over.
Too much time spent, too many lives spent.
Because these flicks are now more preoccupied with riffing on Marvel movie tropes than the actual children's stories they're based on, there's a mid-credit scene that reveals Piglet and Pooh are slowly regenerating from their wounds, preparing for the upcoming Poohniverse. I know where I'll be on opening day for that film. At my home, hopefully watching a better movie.
We'll all be back.
Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey 2 is a bad movie, but that goes without saying. It also just doesn't have much to do with the original stories it's based on, so it still just feels like a cash grab off the novelty of a Winnie the Pooh horror movie without putting the effort in to make it feel related to Winnie the Pooh besides the names of characters and locations. There's also just lots of sequel hooks and attempts at setting up a shared universe, which has the same effect as it does in Marvel movies. They don't give a shit about the movie they're putting in front of you now, they just want to hype up bigger movies later down the line. All that said, Blood and Honey 2 has a lot of kills in it, which will be enough to sell people on it, and it's at least a more polished movie as far as its presentation is concerned. Besides the designs for the villains, the makeup effects are pretty solid. It seems like the budget increase got them some more professionals on the crew, but they still couldn't get a decent writer, and the replacement actors playing Pooh and Christopher Robin just feel like a downgrade. It can be argued that the sequel is a better movie on a technical level, but it somehow feels like a worse attempt at making a Winnie the Pooh horror movie. It just feels even more diluted, like they've just forgotten what this movie is even supposed to be. And ultimately, whether or not the sequel is better than the first movie, they're both still fucking bad movies about a killer Winnie the Pooh, so who cares? I give Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey 2 a new Christopher Robin out of old Christopher Robin. I really miss that old Christopher Robin. We didn't know what we had. Before I go, I want to promote my zombie servant Goulash's channel, The Gulag, which is back with some new videos covering the Beetlejuice franchise. Goulash and I just reviewed Beetlejuice, the long-awaited sequel. Link to that video is in the description or by clicking this card. Subscribe to the Gulag channel today. I command it. This video is made possible through the pledges of my Patreon supporters, and I'd like to give a very special thanks to the kind folks pledged to my shoutouts tier. All of the support on Patreon means a lot to me, and it helps my dark influence continue to grow. If you like this video, like it, and if you loved it, click the subscribe and bell buttons for more vids. Be sure to also keep in touch by following me on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Dr. Wolfula. While I still have your attention, consider pledging to my Patreon to support the channel and get bonus content like previews, VIP Discord server access, private movie night streams, and credits in videos. Consider pledging at patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula. Also, check out official Dr. Wolfula t-shirts and other merch on tpublic.com/user/Dr. Wolfula. Thanks for watching. See you all next time. Dr. Wolfula signing out.